I really appreciate you guys tuning in. And in this video, we are going to be talking about remote desktop access. In the previous videos, you will have seen me using Xrdp to remotely access my Raspberry Pi server. And in this video, I'm going to talk about how I went ahead and did that. But to top the video off, there are actually three unique ways of how to access your Raspberry Pi. One is visually through remote desktop access using the Xrdp. I don't know if it's a plugin or a piece of software, but it's essentially it's a daemon that runs in the background on your Raspberry Pi, which then grants you and gives you access remotely, and that allows you, if you're a Windows user like I am, it allows you to use remote desktop, RDP or RDC, whatever it's called now, to get into your Raspberry Pi. And there are three ways. XRDP is one of them. The second way is Secure Shell. And the third way is using something called Raspberry Pi Connect, which I'll talk about towards the end of this video. Now, XRDP, in my honest opinion, this is the second time I've actually set it up, one for work purposes and one for now privately for my home network. And I've actually found XRDP is ludicrously easy, and it should honestly meet a lot of your needs. Now, there is different session types covered in the config file for XRDP for VNC access. I did not see a reason to even bother with that because XRDP covered a lot of my needs. But this is the tutorial I followed. I'll link it in the comments. And once you follow the tutorial end to end, you should be able to access your Raspberry Pi server using the fixed static IP address you set up in one of the last videos, which is this one here, how to assign a static IP, which is nothing more than just going to your home router software, logging into it, and then going into your local area network settings, looking up the MAC address that is unique to your Raspberry Pi, and just picking a unique number within the subnet range that your router supports or allows. Now, we want to take this a little step further, and we want to use something like Raspberry Pi.local like that, something even more memorable. Because eventually, over time, when you're mixing your work computer for personal stuff as well, you'll get a list of IP addresses and you just won't even know what is what. And ideally, you want to use nice, memorable names. For now, we don't have DNS set up or a DNS entry mapped to this IP address. So we're just going to use the IP address we used previously. And if it's working correctly and you follow the guide correctly, you should see the same user experience you see here. And you'll get, I'm on a 4K screen. So by default, remote desktop has configured 4K access on the, and I'm going to probably reduce that because I don't need it. But essentially, it will by default pick the Xorg session type, as you saw earlier. There are other session types such as VNC. I've never had any reason to explore those because this meets my needs. And to get this to work correctly on the guide, you will need to set up an actual lower privileged user for remote desktop access. And be warned though that if you are thinking that you're smart and you want to use a really secure kind of password, I must warn you that everything you see, if you got a really secure password like this with loads of characters and blah, you can't copy and paste. There's no copy and paste support on this GUI, on this interface. There's absolutely no way for you to. I respect you if you can actually type out that kind of password, but I just can't. So do be warned. You've got no copy and paste support at all in this window. But once you are actually in, you can actually copy anything and it should instantly lift across because the clipboard is instantly connected in the background. So you can actually start pasting things in. And there you go. That really is all there is to getting XRDP set up. And then you can just move it closer to your home network where if you're lucky and you've got a patch panel and a network rack or just closer to your router, whatever it is, then so be it. And then you could just leave it on. It uses absolute trickle of power, really low power requirements, and you could just leave it on all the time. And then you can start benefit from having a really stable, fast Raspberry Pi server for your home network and personal projects. Now, you can actually configure that screen that you saw a minute ago. Let me just close this again. Let me close it again, and we can get back into it again. I do tend to switch around using Start or the Spotlight way of getting in, but you go back into it again. Honestly, over time, you just don't want to be fiddling with usernames and passwords, and you can actually default this experience. And there's a file that you can use to make this experience a lot more quicker and a lot more seamless. It's called the XRDP config file. and it's located in the etc folder. Where is it? etc? And then you can scroll to the bottom, Xrdp, and then in here there is xrdp/conf. I think it's conf. I'm gonna have to look a bit closer. Maybe it is the ini file actually. Let's open the ini file. Yes, it's the ini file. If you actually open this file, there are a bunch of things that you can switch on and off, but fundamentally there's a section below called session types. So there's password for generic PNC proxy. There's the Xorg one, which I just used. If you put your username and password in there, by default, it won't even bother to ask you for a username or password, and it'll just allow you to log in instantly. You'll still have to click through, but I will show you that next. One thing I wanted to cover was showing how the Xrdp login journey through remote desktop becomes a lot simpler once you give it the default username and password which you previously had to enter in. Now, you don't have to do this, it is completely optional. I just don't want to be faffing about with usernames and passwords, especially on a home network, as it should only be me on my home network. So once you've given it a default username and password on the Xorg session type, it doesn't even bother to ask for a username and password, and it just seamlessly lets you in. And I find that would be really useful for probably most users. Now you can decide for yourself what works for you. Now, I must warn you that if you make a mistake in the config file, the Xrdp config file, you will lose all of your Xrdp access because the server that runs it. So if you do system cl status like this, and you do Xrdp, what you'll see is that the service just won't be running. And the reason why it won't be running is because you made a mistake in the config file. And honestly, I found it to be a bit of a pain trying to fix and revive the service, trying to figure out what went wrong. Now, the mistake I made was there was a padding or spacing issue, and rather than actually trying to debug that properly, I just reinstalled the Xrdp service again using the guide. And that was honestly it's the simplest, best advice I can give you. If you run into any issues where your service just doesn't start after you've tried to enter in a default username and password, just reinstall it. And then hopefully it'll be running like this every time, and then it should make your life a little bit easier when you try and log in again. Now, if you run into these types of problems, or you made a mistake on the config file for Xrdp, I genuinely recommend you set up a backup remote access plan, which I think is SSH, and that's what we're going to do in the next video. On the next part of this video, we're going to discuss how to get SSH access to the box, which is remarkably a lot less work than you think. So tune in for that. See you in a moment. In the first part of this video, we talked about setting up Xrdp visual-based remote desktop access to your Raspberry Pi server using a open source software called Xrdp, which is the Linux equivalent of the remote desktop protocol. And that's very useful for you if you're a Windows user. However, as you saw in the previous part of the video, you saw that if you make one mistake in the ini file, your Xrdp daemon can actually fail to start. And then you're in a bit of a world of pain, because if your Raspberry Pi server is in a network cabinet or it's under the stairs in your house next to your router, you're going to have to reconnect everything, connect a monitor to it, get logged back into it, and try to reset and fix your broken Xrdp daemon. And that's just a world of pain. And as I previously said, I recommend you setting up SSH access, which is what we're going to do next. Now, I've gone ahead and set up a bunch of things because it's incredibly really straightforward, and I'm just going to walk you through it. The first thing you need is to have SSH keygen, an open source utility available on the command line. I'm using Windows Terminal, which is my go-to thing. Now, if you don't have SSH keygen, you can actually grab it using another open source utility called Chocolatey, or Microsoft's package manager called Winget. You can just Google for the command. It's really straightforward. We use a flag called -t to specify the type, which is the narrow safe key, and then we use the -b flag to specify the length of the key, which is 4,000 byte or 4,000 in length, I think. And what that does is that you could just enter in. I didn't bother setting up a passphrase for this at all, so just default enter 3 times, and it generates a public and private key file for you. And it places it into a standardized location called your home location.ssh. And then what you want to do is you want to take the contents of your public file For obvious reasons, I'm not going to show this on this video. You want to take the contents of this file and then you want to paste it into your authorized keys file on your Raspberry Pi server. And luckily, we set up Xrdp first to try and make this process a lot smoother and a lot easier. So we've got Xrdp open. I've got some notes ready to roll. And essentially, all I did was I used the make directory command to create the .ssh folder for me. And then what I did was that I used the nano command to create an empty authorized keys empty file for me. I changed the permissions on the folder and the keys file, because if your SSH server on your Raspberry Pi can't actually access those two folders, that folder and that file, it's not going to be able to pick up and read your config. So you need to make sure you got those settings correct. And if you are in a situation where your Raspberry Pi was set up without SSH access, then you can actually enable it through the menu, which appears to have opened up off screen, which is down here. And I think it's there, SSH access. For me, it actually didn't slide on first time. I actually had to go in and use something called Raspberry Pi config. And in order to get into that, I had to use the root user. So luckily I removed the root user password so then I can access the root user using su minus. I actually have a little bit here in my notes, which you can just pause the screen and take a look at. This is all I did to remove the remote user access. If you're a seasoned Linux professional, please do comment on the video and let me know what you recommend typical home user should do. This is just what I did for my home network. There may be seasoned vets out there who may tell you otherwise. Don't do this. So please do comment. Do let me know if I'm giving out poor advice. Anyway, so that's how I got into the Raspberry Pi config. Because as you can clearly there, it tells you should be using sudo. My Raspberry Pi user doesn't have sudo access because it's not in the sudo's file. So Raspberry Pi Linux, honestly, if you're a Windows user, does not make things easy for you at all. It can actually become very painful. But once you're in your root user and you can just do Raspberry Pi config, it actually opens up this cool little world. And in here, this gives you the guaranteed backup way to get into it. And I did it in here. This is all I did. And then you can press escape to get back to the root menu. And then you can click finish to get out of it. And then that will guarantee to enable the SSH server for you. And as a bare minimum, that's kind of all you need to access your Raspberry Pi server just using SSH. Now, the one thing to bear in mind is that you want to connect on the user that you set up. So if you look down here, you can see it's the actual Xrdp user we set up. And when you go back to Windows, you can actually see that you can actually connect in. Oops, I'm actually connecting. Let me just exit. You should be able to just do SSH, the name of your user, and then the actual fixed IP, which we set up in the previous video, and then that should instantly let you in. Now, by default, I would expect it to demand a password from you. That's actually what should happen. And the way you remove the password prompt is by editing the SSH config file. So go back onto the server. There's actually a config file in this location which you can use sudo with nano editor access. And then these are the things that you turn off. So as you can see, I made some notes. So change, that's a security one. So make sure you do that one. Public key authentication, which is what we want to use. We want to authenticate using the public key we copied in. Key is actually created in this step down here. Nano create me an authorized keys file in this location. That's what this command does. And then in there, you can actually paste in your public key file, which is what I referenced here. I'm going to copy the contents of that file into the nano editor right here. And nano's really straightforward editor to use. You could use the Control X and Y command to save and quit, and then that will save your public key. And that's kind of what this bit here is about. So you want to uncomment this line in your SSHD config file, uncomment it, change it to yes. Password authentication, you want to turn that off, obviously, because you don't want to use password authentication. But once again, it's entirely up to you. It's your home server, it's your home network. You can pick the flavor of access that is what you're interested in. All the settings are here. You've got remote enabling root user access. You've got the commands there to help you set up your SSH. And then if your SSH is not working, then you've obviously, as your SSH server, then you need to turn it on via this method here as a backup, or you can go through the menus. And that's all it takes to get SSH access. And then the final part of this video, we are going to talk about Raspberry Pi Connect. So see you then. Now, the third and final option in this video I was going to talk about is Raspberry Pi Connect. And it's actually the mystery option. And it could actually be the silver bullet that you are after. Now, if you can't be bothered with Xrdp and setting up the config for that, or SSH and the SSH server on your Raspberry Pi, luckily, the makers of the Raspberry Pi actually have their own implementation, and it's called Raspberry Pi Connect. And it actually provides a best of both worlds. Now, I'm not going to bother showing you how to do this because this is entirely optional. It's entirely up to you what works for you. I wanted to give you just an overview so that you can decide what works for you. So you can either do Raspberry Pi Connect, which gives you the best of both worlds, or you can just stick with Xrdp and SSH, which kind of gives you a blend, and you can decide what works for you or not. Because if your Raspberry Pi Connect, for some reason, if you can't access it, if you can't log in, if you've got connectivity issues, all your connectivity goes with it. So you won't be able to log in or access your Raspberry Pi. Whereas if your XRDP kind of goes down and something's wrong with the XRDP daemon on your Raspberry Pi, then at least you've got SSH access through terminal like this. You can still get in. Now on this machine, this is my work PC. I don't have the public certificate, which is going to be covered in another video, which is the OneDrive problem, which is another freak annoying problem I'm going to solve with a NAS server on my Raspberry Pi. But anyway, going back to the nature of this video is about giving you the third option, which is Raspberry Pi Connect. And there's a nice website. You sign in, you have to create an account. And what it does is that it gives you free out of the box access to anywhere in the world. Now, you have to think for yourself, do you want to access your Raspberry Pi externally? You could think of remote VPN scenarios where you could be in a hotel or an airport lounge and you want to make use of your Raspberry Pi Pi-hole server for all your DNS and ad blocking and stuff like that. So there's some scenarios where that could prove useful, but it's entirely up to you. But the Raspberry Pi Connect gives you command line access, kind of similar to this, and it also gives you remote desktop access, as you can see there. Now, I personally won't be doing this because I'm just happy with XRDP and SSH, as I've already done that. But these guys have put together quite a nice guide, and you can just follow the guide and then honestly talk to me in the comments. Let me know what you think. Do you want the silver bullet? Do you just want this whole experience, or do you just want to do it this way, where you've got all these steps? And then there's one cool feature it talks about, which is actually screen sharing. That could be actually really quite useful. But once again, it's really down to your individual personal needs. What do you need from your home network? And talk to me. Tell me what works for you. Anyway, that's it for this video. This is the 3-part Connect video, which is talking to you about and showing you how the 3 cool ways of how you can actually access your Raspberry Pi, which is connected to your home network. Mine is, I've now sited it in my network cabinet in my garage. So now I'm going to be moving on to the next video, which is finally setting up a NAS server, because I desperately need to move all my crap off my, I think it's like nearly 20-year-old passport drive, would you believe? I've got a Western Digital passport drive, 1 terabyte from a very long time ago. And if it dies, I'm in a world of pain. So please stay tuned. Thanks for watching, and keep a lookout for the next video, which is going to be the NAS server. But anyway, thank you very much. See you in the next video. Bye.